like to begin with a poem called The Folded Page by Charles Calvin. Up in a quaint old attic, as the raindrops patter down, pretty amazing, huh? I am paging through an old school book, dusty, tattered, and torn. I came to a page that was folded down, and across it was written in a childish hand, "The teacher says to leave this for now. It's too hard to understand." I unfolded the page and read, and then I nodded in my head, and I, the teacher, was right. Now I understand. I hear lots of pages in the book of life that are hard to understand. All we can do is fold them down and write, "The teacher says to leave this for now. 'Tis hard to understand." Then someday, maybe in heaven, we will unfold the pages again, read them and say, "Aye, the teacher was right. Now I understand." One of the most significant challenges and aspects of faith is in many, many ways part of the gospel that we just heard. Namely, the relationship between the storms in our lives and what we believe about God regarding those storms. Why does life have to be so hard? Does God cause the storms? If He doesn't cause them, why does He allow them? Is God indifferent? Jesus asleep on a cushion during the storm in the boat? And what, if anything, are the storms supposed to teach us? And the list goes on and on and on. God asked Job in this reading, and by the way, Job is probably the most magnificent book you could read in the Old Testament. It's filled with wisdom. It's probably unsatisfactory to a lot of people because it has wisdom and not answers. And I think a lot of times the most important and in-depth things in life are about that. And so God asked Job what Jesus asked of his disciples in the boat and what He asks of each one of us here tonight. Do you have faith? The old balance between faith and fear. We could say ideally that if we have faith, we should have no fear, no anxiety, no misgivings, and so on and so forth. But that's in a perfect world. That's with perfect people. These two realities, and they are realities, that faith and fear many times live alongside each other. And that's been the case since there's been humanity and since there's been faith in a higher power. It's not as simple as the neatly tied together story that we just heard. The disciples are afraid for their lives. The boat is taking on water, and there's Jesus asleep on a cushion. And they wake him up, scared to death. And Jesus asks them, "Do you have faith?" And so in a way, it doesn't go, Jesus stands up and He commands the waves and the winds and the storm, and boom, it's gone. That would be nice, but it's not necessarily the way it comes about. It doesn't mean that God is asleep or that God is indifferent. It doesn't mean that God doesn't care about it or that he just lets it happen. It's a matter of really trying to put ourselves into God's hands more and more and more. And some days we'll do it, some days we won't. We have to live with that. But that should be what we're looking at. That should be the target. Today we had kindergarten graduation for the academy. And we all want to grow mature, and we want to grow up, and we want to be sophisticated, and so on and so forth. But watching their faces, watching their songs, their expressions, etc., and everyone different, some shy kids, some kind of really outgoing, but there was a simplicity of faith when they both prayed and when they both sang about God. And it was that childlike faith that Jesus Christ refers to on more than one occasion. Mrs. LaSalle, the principal, was telling me that this past week, when she was sitting in her office one day and the kindergarten was moving from one wing to the other, and they have to pass through the major entranceway there, and there's a huge statue of Mary, kind of about the size of our statue here, maybe a tiny bit smaller. And they were about to walk, I guess, from one end to the other, and one of the kids, that she couldn't tell which one, said, hold it. Let's say a prayer." And so they stopped at the statue of the Virgin Mary, and together they prayed a Hail Mary. That's the voice of a child. That's the voice that we're called to. The voice of God can bring peace to our hearts and can light the darkest days of our lives. But only if we take time to stop, to let go, to give over to God, to take time to pray. It will not be an instant answer. It will not feel good all the time. But that's what we have. That's truly what we have. And I know that, listening to Christ week after week after week in the gospel, if there's one thing I know, is that he cares. And so no matter how much we're hurting and we might think that nobody's doing anything, God's not doing anything, God truly loves us through it. And he loved the disciples. He wasn't going to let them die at that moment. But he also didn't want them to be anxious. He wanted them to believe and really believe. And that's a challenge every day of our lives, and will be until the day that we die. When we ask God the really hard questions, as we're apt to do, don't be surprised that you don't get that black and white answer. But God does answer us. And many, many times that answer is, do not fear, believe. And one day, in true wisdom, we will be able to respond. The teacher says, not today. Wait, and one day we will all understand. Let's try to trust those words.